Hey, hi, Riley. All right, so a little more about Darwin's voyage. So we were talking about how he went down, this is supposed to be South America, and he went down from the polar regions of South America up the coast, cutting in and out of the coast, and then up near the Galapagos, which is off the coast of Ecuador, Peru, more Ecuador. So anyway, as he went along, as I was saying before, he was noticing the differences in animals and came up with this idea that the environment actually changed animals. And he was looking, the famous example is Darwin's finches. A finch is a bird kind of like a cardinal that normally has a beak that looks like this, like a cardinal beak. What they call anvil shaped. This is really good for seed eaters because they clasp on the seed and crunch it and are able to break it. And then on the different islands, though, of the Galapagos, there were different resources. So some of the islands had, mountains and fresh water, and they had different kinds of plants that had seeds and also perhaps fruits or something. And then some of the other islands had basically the main food source would have been things washing up on the shore like dead logs or something like that, that might have bugs inside of the dead wood. And so there was what he noticed was differences in the beaks of this otherwise finch-looking bird. And he measured them, and they had lengths and depth, which is like the width of it. And basically, he looked at the different beaks and sort of said, well, these beaks are matching their food source. So, again, this idea of environment dictating a feature. All right, so we came up with the idea of natural selection. So natural selection, I'm just back out so you guys can take notes on the whole thing if you want to. Natural selection basically is the first thing that he said was that individuals within a population have variability that is inheritable and due to chance. So this first one is important for a couple of reasons. One thing is it's a population phenomena. So in other words, he's saying that natural selection happens in a small group of organisms, not the whole species. For example, not all of gray squirrels that are in all of North America, so all up and along the eastern seaboard, but just a population. And the variability that is inheritable, number one, it can't be something that's just added on that has nothing to do with their genetic makeup or their inheritability, and also due to chance. And we know now that this has to do with alleles and the differences in dominant recessive alleles and that kind of thing. All right, so this was addressing Lamarck's idea that it was something that happened during their lifetime, and that they would then inherit the thing that the organism got during the lifetime. Also, it's talking about individuals that have this variability that is just, it's inherent variability. It's not really something that they're choosing to have that variability. It's just variability that occurs. And again, we know now that's because of alleles. And it says not all, the next part is not all individuals in a population will survive and reproduce. So this was using Malthus's idea that the environment can't support a population if it continues to rise in an exponential way, which most populations will. And that it's talking also, another important part of this statement is reproduction, because it's not just about survival, it's about reproducing, and in fact it's about how many you reproduce. For example, you might have a cardinal or something like that that is kind of not doing super great in the environment, but they still might produce a clutch of eggs, but maybe fewer eggs than its neighbor. And also the ones that are doing well might produce maybe 2 clutches of eggs with many more of them than the one that is doing poorly. So it's about reproductive success as well. The third part is individuals that do well will pass on the best traits to their offspring. Now we know that that's not necessarily the best traits are always passed on, because again, it's due to allele frequency or chance. But if it's doing well and you have those traits, then obviously you at least have some of that genetic material, and that is passed on to your offspring. And then over time, populations of organisms that are all doing this will evolve. In other words, if you have, let's say, we're talking about the sheep that are white in the polar regions. If you have brown ones that are being born, but they get picked off by predators, and the white ones live and reproduce, then over time the population will tend to be on the white end. That's mainly because the dark ones are being picked off. And then we say that they have features then that are adapted to their environment, or an adaptation would be, in this case, white fur. So it's not like they develop, make up this adaptation to suit their environment. It's just that it happened to work and it makes them survive and reproduce. Okay, so that's the overall theory of natural selection. Now, interestingly, Darwin came up with this idea, and he, of course, was talking back and forth with Lyell about it via letters, but he also had another friend who was named Alfred Wallace. And Wallace was working on plants, and he was also, interestingly, working in South America as well. And Wallace had malaria, and he ended up coming up with the theory of natural selection on his own, but it was to do with something else, not the finches, but with plants, in a fevered sleep. So he was like actually having a fever from the malaria, came up with this concept, and he wrote to Darwin and said, "What do you think of this?" And Darwin was like, "Whoa, okay, well, I thought the same thing." And eventually they ended up going to the scientific meetings like I was telling you about, and what they presented this idea of natural selection together, and talked about how they came up with it separately. And it was pretty well accepted because that they had both come up with it in different situations. So that was kind of a good thing. This was a while though after his initial treatise, and how he wrote it up. I think it was something like 20 or 30 years or something like that. Anyway, it was a while. And he finally put it together in a manuscript called On the Origin of Species. So basically Darwin took a while to develop this concept, and it had partially to do because Lamarck was laughed out of the chamber, and it wasn't until Wallace sort of lit a fire under him that they went together to do this. Now, the two fields of interest that really help support the idea of natural selection and evolution as a whole are things to do with population. So mainly what we're talking about is ecological principles of population parameters, and those are, so it's ecology. And also ecology includes niches and things like that, and that includes reproductive success and survivability. And then the other one, of course, is genetics. The genetics ideas and the chance alleles, and how genetic things, characteristics are passed along, is another field that is supportive of the idea of natural selection.